Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
I think what's interesting about the list that you put up here is also in the differences. They don't really all have the same mission. Many of them are going to end up working together to solve the overall problem. They have different focuses and what have you. So I think what you've shown is kind of a representative sample of the way different organizations are approaching standardization and getting together to create common benefit for IoT.
There's a symbiotic relationship between standards organizations like the IETF and the IEEE and the nonprofit IoT alliances, groups, and consortia. The IoT industry needs standards, and the standards organizations need the IoT consortia to focus them on real-world use cases and then carry on with testing, certification, and marketing. The gray zone is when the consortia get into the standards game. While there's value in making air quotes standards of standards, it can also be detrimental to industry when they're not made open to the public.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is for business leaders and managers employing the Internet of Things for their business or the business of their customers. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair, and I interview the industry's leading authorities to find out how they use IoT to improve business and create value. If you like this show, subscribe to it on iTunes and go to IoTinc.com to check out my complimentary articles, videos, meetups, and webinars. Like Podcast 8, this podcast is a little different than my typical format. It was recorded at the GoGoNet Live 5 conference during the panel discussion, Making Sense of Standards Bodies, Alliances, Associations, and Consortia. I discussed the IEEE, IETF, IPSO, the Open Interconnect Consortium, the Thread Group, the Industrial Internet Consortium, and the All-Seen Alliance with panelists Carsten Bormann, Amine Chigani, Michael Koster, and Michael Richardson. As part of this podcast series, I've interviewed all the alliances, groups, consortia mentioned in this show. But this panel discussion provides a useful outside perspective on the role of these organizations with respect to standards in the IoT industry. You may be interested to know I'm starting to do webinars on the business of the Internet of Things. Just head over to IoTinc.com to find out when they are and how to sign up. If you want to catch me live, I'm also starting to do workshops at various IoT conferences on the business of the Internet of Things.
If you guys are like me, the proliferation of all the different standards bodies, I don't know if I should group them in with the alliances, with the consortiums, and with the groups, is a little bit confusing. My name is Bruce Sinclair. I'll be the moderator of this panel. And if you could maybe just first introduce yourselves, and then we'll get into just talking about what's up with all these different organizations.
Okay, I'm Michael Koster. I'm with ARM, and I work on Internet of Things standards and architectures at ARM. I'm involved in both the IETF and the IPSO Alliance Smart Objects Committee.
My name is Amine Chigani. I am with GE. I am a solution architect developing industrial internet solutions for the different businesses within GE. I'm also one of the founding members of the Industrial Internet Consortium, so I'll probably be speaking to that.
My name is Michael Richardson. I have a company, Sandelman Software Works. I'm a consultant. I have been involved in the IETF for about 20 years, and I don't know very many of these alliances and groups myself.
Carsten Bormann, also having been involved with the IETF for 20 years. I'm with the Universität Bremen in Germany and have been working on various internet-related technologies. And I have been chairing the 6LoWPAN working group until it was replaced by the 6Low working group, and right now I'm co-chair of the core working group working on application standards for the Internet of Things.
Well, great. I'd like to start with, the ones that we've identified are and maybe there's some missing ones, and so you guys can kind of fill it in. But it seems, there are a lot of, obviously, organizations that are targeted around the Internet of Things, but these ones are more networking focused. And so the ones we're talking about are the IPSO Alliance, the Industrial Internet Consortium, the All Seen Alliance, the Thread Group, and then the Open Interconnect Consortium. They seem to be the ones, the flavors of today that seem to be most focused on networking. First of all, before we go any further, are there any other ones? I don't think there needs to be any other ones, but are there any that are missing out of this list here that people should be looking at? Or is this pretty much it?
I said Zigbee. The other organizations that are standards bodies, but the way that they operate at times, I think of them as more as private consortiums. Okay, I'm thinking about IEC, for instance, the electrical people. They are, in my experience, are so closed, like it's easier to get information about what Zigbee is doing than what they're doing. Or their processes are so complicated and Byzantine that by the time you can't see their document without being a member, and then when you pay the money, sometimes you still don't get the document, or you don't get the document you wanted. And you're like, this is a real 6 years of effort, and it looks like you guys went wrong about 5 years and 11 months ago. And so what can we do? I mean, it can't help you, right? So they're like, oh, we really need to make this work, and it's it's an XML router over IPv4. Like that's seriously one of the things that was proposed in Smart Grid, and it went a long way. And I don't know if it's dead yet. Okay, I'm not sure.
So there's some potential roadkill out there, but are there any other more relevant ones to today that we're missing on the list?
It's probably worth mentioning that the Bluetooth SIG now has an IP working group. So it's quite likely that the purveyors of the various radio technologies will look at this in various levels of detail.
Okay. And the Wi-Fi forum has the same thing, I think I've just learned.
Okay.
So, there are other standards bodies. IEEE is working on IoT standards and all that. But I think what's interesting about the list that you put up here is also in the differences. They don't really all have the same mission. Many of them are going to end up working together to solve the overall problem. They have different focuses and what have you. So I think what you've shown is kind of a representative sample of the way different organizations are approaching standardization and getting together to create common benefit for IoT.
Well, that's a good segue, and maybe you can start. But what is the missions, the overlap of the missions? I think that's the first thing. It's trying to untangle what they do and how they're different. Can you maybe talk to the industrial?
And I think this could be a good example to give a clear distinction between a standards body and other organizations such as the Industrial Internet Consortium. What the Industrial Internet Consortium is not, it's not a standards organization.
It's not a standards. Okay.
So I think lumping those together, I think for the audience, we're talking about a group of stakeholders coming together. I think there is a standards organization to standardize on a particular technology versus a consortium that's trying to, for the industrial internet, for example, is trying to take advantage of a white space called the industrial internet and monetize on it. So the industrial internet main mission is to identify, define this white space that we call the industrial internet that's been untapped. It's a $32 trillion market opportunity, and no one company can actually define and realize this market opportunity. So there is a clear understanding that from the big companies, you have the IBM, GE, Intel, Cisco, to the small players, all have a single interest of identifying the space, identifying the gaps, and then competing with services and products to monetize on that. So I think that is different from...
So not creating standards, but maybe nominating or supporting standards? Would that be the differentiator?
It is influencing standards, evaluating current standards, whether they meet. I think the challenges of the industrial internet space. So, for example, the industrial internet has formalized relationships with organizations such as the OMG, the Open Group, Eclipse, Oasis, and many others. And the concept is As we get to define the space, we're going to evaluate, we're going to look at existing technologies and standards, identify the gaps, utilize what we already have and build on top of it. So you could see a group that really focused on standardizing and a group that is focused on making money of those standards.
So I didn't know about the Industrial Internet Consortium until I met you this morning, and I read the web pages, and it looks really, really cool. And I think that's a really good thing. And I want to say that one of the problems that IETF working groups have is that we get a set of requirements, usually from the people that are involved, and frequently the scope of the work, if you kind of leave us to ourselves, we'll do one of two things. It'll either become so broad and so all inclusive and happy granola kind of thing, that effectively we've said nothing about anything, right? We've made a standard that says you can do whatever you want whenever you like, and that's great, okay? And everyone's happy, okay? Well, that's not a standard. And
an all-inclusive standard.
It's an all-inclusive standard. And we've done this on occasion, and some of the worst situations for this has been X500, X509, PKICs, the sole certificate stuff, so inclusive and broad and yet has so many problems over 25 years, but nobody dares to throw it out. So just to make an example, right, we have X500, which is a directory system that's from like 30 years ago and has no ability to name machines, right? It names people, John Smith. It doesn't even know how to distinguish all the John Smiths in the world. Okay, what a useless piece. Okay, so we have X509 that says how to sign these things, right? Assuming you had the right John Smith. And then we had a working group in the IETF called PKICs, which ran for almost 20 years, and which said, well, a little bit more how to precisely use this stuff. Well, in the IPsec space, we had to make a working group called PKI for IPsec, which said exactly how to put these things in VPN gateways. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Well, we are going to have a working group in the IETF or somewhere else that says PKI for IoT. We're going to have to do that. We're not going to get to throw out this technology. It's sad, but it's true. Maybe Jose will be the new format, but we're still going to have to be able to translate back and forth between the other things. That would be wonderful. The point I'm trying to make here is, though, the other side that happens is we build something which is so specific that it addresses one person or one vendor's need, and that's it. And no one else can innovate. And then what we see is, well, I didn't really like that one, so I made my own, right? So we wind up with a proliferation of different standards rather than a good one. So the question is, what's in between? And to get that real, piece out of there, what we need is people who are actually using it and deploying it, not vendors of hardware that hope to sell into that market, but the people they're selling to, we call them operators, to come to the IETF and say, no, it's not going to work for me. So in one working group that is right up your alley, and I'm going to talk later about that, we want to know to what extent certificates and certificate management is something that is going to fly in industrial areas, right? And so I think this is a wonderful thing, and if this is where it's going to go, wow, what an opportunity to really get this right and get it right quickly. And that's, I think, really important about this.
So just to add to this, I completely agree with what Michael just said. Another group that has been very instrumental in keeping us honest in the IETF is the open source community, because they also are using what we are doing and can quickly tell us what works and what doesn't work. What the open source community does not always give us is a good sense of what's actually needed. So that's really where Consortia can be helpful in selecting technology that works together in a good way.
I think it's helpful for the audience to describe a little bit how the IIC is structured. I think there are three focus areas. Just to add to what Michael said, the first one is what we call the IIC ecosystem, which is this private-public partnerships that needs to exist to drive and innovate in the space of the industrial internet. The second one is the technology, the working groups, and we have two major working groups: the technology group, under which there are many teams, and the security group. under which there are many teams, and that speaks to what you said. But still, that's not enough. The final focus area is the test beds, and that's where the example of the open source, you say, trying with things. Test beds are about taking these understandings of the gaps of the technologies and then having member companies saying, I raise my hand, I'm going to build this test bed, and I'm going to show how it works, and I'm going to show how I can make money out of it. And that is something that can be brought back to the technology group to revisit some of the analyses that they've done on standards or the architectures or the security frameworks, and also goes back all the way to the ecosystem for evaluation and adoption. So I think the consortium has thought about all of these, and I think the test beds are the key, I think, differentiators that we're going to have companies spending money, and if you go to the website, you'll see members have put in a lot of money in demonstrating some of the pieces of the industrial internet. And of course, if you're a pioneer, then you get to benefit from the first slice of the market opportunities.
Yeah. Michael, can you talk to IPSO a little bit, and how does it fit into the
IPSO Alliance? Again, we're looking at what are the gaps. IPSO Alliance was formed to basically promote IP protocols for smart objects.
That's IPSO.
So,
yep.
Very broad mission. We basically just want to see things connected using IP protocols. So we want an Internet of Things. That extends a little bit to web protocols because that's been so successful as well. So that's the broad mission of the IPSO Alliance. We've recently been doing some work that we call Smart Objects, which is to basically take some existing protocols that are already built on top of IP, particularly the COAP protocol and IETF protocols from the core working group, and another organization, the OMA, Open Mobile Alliance, which has their lightweight M2M management specification. And then we're building a set of data models for devices and application level things like thermostats, temperature sensors, things of that nature, to function as sort of a primitive, sort of data model primitives for doing interoperability. So we're just looking at the upper layers of the stack and building on other technology that already exists in the IP world, so IP-based technology. A couple of other these I could mention a little bit about too, as people were talking, and how different gaps are being addressed. So one of the things that a couple of these alliances are looking at is certification. So IETF basically creates protocols and building blocks to make system architectures out of, but there's no real way to say, well, how do I know when I go buy this it's going to work with this, or if I sign up with a software contractor that all my devices are going to work together. And that's something that at one level, Thread Group might be able to do, the lower levels of the IP stack that run on wireless networks. And a group like Open Internet Consortium might be able to take existing standards and just specify how they go together to make a complete end-to-end system. This is what the OMA does, for example. They take COAP and they take a number of IETF protocols, and they specify how you use those protocols to build a server. But what we need is, of course, a much broader thing than that.
For me, what's the role of, I didn't say standards here, it was more, alliances, consortiums, and groups. But it seems like there's a partnership, and it's come out in the conversation so far, in the sense that we've got standard bodies, but they need to rely on industry to make sure what they're standardizing is relevant. And then you've got the alliances, the groups, and the consortiums who can fill in the gaps where maybe they're doing the certification, maybe they're doing the testing, maybe they're getting the requirements from the real world. And that seems like a partnership. But then I guess where it kind of falls down is when some of these start trying to becoming standardization bodies, because then it seems like it breaks that model, because it's not an open standardization process, it's kind of a standardization process within the members of the group. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, and it's extremely frustrating. As an open source developer, it's extremely frustrating to sit down and go, well, how do I implement this? And then discover that you're not actually sure what it is, because you often can't read the documents. One of the most frustrating things is is a number of alliances and consortiums and this kind of stuff don't even have a stable URL for their document. Okay, you have to log into their website and go here and go there. When you look at the top of the URL, it hasn't changed because they have some CMS that is all, browser state based. So I can't even say to Carsten, here's the document, it's over here. You want to read paragraph 12, right? That's the problem, right? So I can't even talk about it intelligently, even if we're both members, let alone, we're not members. And that's a real problem. Standards which open source developers cannot read for free. Okay, free means not just free beer, but free speech. Okay, so if I can't put a copy on my laptop and work at it at the cottage, then it's just not going to happen. It's not going to get built, and you won't have that stuff out there. But there's another side, which is a legal side, and the IETF is getting challenged recently in some places as to not all countries consider the IETF standards to be a standards development organization. So there are countries for which IETF standards are not allowed to be mentioned. Okay? Now, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and I'm not going to speak about all the other ones that have happened recently, is very specific, and a group I'm part of in Ottawa actually deals with this, where we have two names. They're called Getting Open Source into Government, but we also realize that's Getting Open Standards Logic into Government. It's GOSLING. It's a good acronym. Anyway, but one of the key things is that one of the things that governments can't do, and in most cases that goes down all the way to municipalities and anybody who's supported that way, is they can't buy things for which there's not a performance specification. So they're not allowed to go out and buy a copy of Microsoft Word. That is a brand. The best they can say is, I have Microsoft Word or equivalent. Well, really now what they can say is, I need an editor that supports OOXML format. That's what they're supposed to say. And so it's really important if you do a profile of, that says use A and B and C and 6LO and this and that and GCH and GHC, I'm sorry. If you're saying I want to do all these things, it's actually really important to have a document that goes through a standards organization that says, here is the single document that specifies for the application of dishwashers, okay, that these are the things that I expect to have in the dishwasher. Because once you do that, it now becomes possible for people that want to buy your stuff to actually specify it, right? And that's a really big deal. Otherwise, you're not selling to governments. And if you're not selling to governments, then I suspect you're probably not in business, right?
Traditionally, technology standardizers, technology alliances have left the user experience as a market differentiation mechanism to the individual vendors. But that doesn't work in this space. In particular, security that has a user experience that is different between different systems that we want to connect just doesn't work. If people who know how to operate system A suddenly make serious security mistakes when operating system B because the user experience is different, we have created an insecure Internet of Things. So that's maybe a new thing for the consortia to look at, making sure that we actually have user experiences that still provide some market differentiation potential, of course, but that actually standardize the core things. Obviously, if you would be selling a car that had the gas pedal on the left, that wouldn't work too well. And we're selling lots of internet devices with gas pedals on the left.
Well, we're doing it worse, actually. We're selling cars that need different kinds of gas, right? That we're not even at the point of standardizing the controls. They take different fuel. But I think this is a very important question, and I don't think it's going to get better soon. I think it's going to get significantly worse. I think that there will be a new back to the land movement to get away from all this siloed stuff. There will be people who can't sell their houses because it's got the wrong technology built in. And my take on all this is pretty much what I'm sorry, I forgot his name, but he's been recently said this. Basically, he said that IoT devices either must be field upgradable or must have an end of life. Okay? So in a year, they turn off, not 10 years, a year. And that's because if you can't field upgrade them to fix the bugs, then you better turn them off. And that's going to be really wasteful. And I realized, of course, turning off may mean I can return it to the factory where it'll get reflashed and sent back to me. So maybe it's not quite so e-wasteful as I thought it would be. But the reality is there's going to be an awful lot of devices that are going to go in the garbage because they cannot or won't implement the things that matter. And so my take on it is that the consumers are painfully going to become aware. They're going to start asking specifically, does this run an open standard? And if the answer is no, then they're going to say, I'm sorry, I don't care if it's 10% cheaper. I will have to get a new one.
And we just need to get to that standard, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of will out there to do that. And Comcast, 2 people from Comcast stood up at the IEEE public workshop on P2413 and said the next Xfinity system will be open to developers and open to many people to contribute. So they're not just going to go, back to iControl and have them spin their proprietary stuff one more time. They want to open up. All of the operators and service providers are saying, look, we're seeing the pressure now, so we want to get together and do standards. And that's where things like Open Internet Interconnect Consortium come from. And we're building the stuff now. So imagine Thread Group comes up with, and the intention there is for a more, an open standard for everyone to be able to use as well. Comes up with a way to connect low power radio, so anything will use a single access point for low power radio. And Open Internet Consortium is already looking at using COAP and IETF protocols and these standards. So if there's critical mass in the industry around these standards, which there seems to be the will for, then things are already moving in this direction. We need to just keep it going.
I just want to look at it from let's kind of look at it from the business perspective. So I'm a business. And why are these alliances, consortiums, or groups relevant? So how do I take advantage of these organizations for my business? What do I do? How do I interact? Why do I care?
So I think the example of the Industrial Internet Consortium, I think some of the benefits include having exposure to more than 95 members across 22 countries, all in the industrial internet space. So I think Steve could be part of the consortium. Both contributes to defining what the industrial internet is, as well as sell his product.
Okay.
So I think that would be one clear. I think 2 is companies are being literally forced into revolutionizing how to do business in the industrial internet space. And it's until you can define this space, you can't think of new business models, what are you going to change to. And I think one of the speakers earlier, you challenged him into, we don't even know what the Internet of Things is. And I think unless you define that very clearly, you define what that market opportunity is and how you go about it, it's very difficult to compete. So I think the benefit is I think it goes without mention, is everybody wants to take a piece of this market opportunity, and it's until you come to a group of like-minded company, you define what that is, and then the competition starts.
So it's a great club to be part of.
Yes.
Of course, there are other motivations you might have for entering a consortium. For instance, the Bluetooth SIG really is interesting because it provides an IPR pool, so that the members of the Bluetooth SIG don't necessarily have problems, at least with the other members of the Bluetooth SIG. Of course, you never know when you run into a patent booby trap. That is very useful for them, but on the other hand, it creates a problem, because as long as the specification is in the making, it's not possible for people outside the consortium to actually see what's going on and to provide input. So this has a positive side and a negative side. Some consortia are obviously being created with the idea that the main motivation to go in there is to gain influence on what the outcome will be. So they will be even more limited in what input they actually allow from the outside. And that generally creates quality problems because you really have to have some form of open input to a standardization activity. So that doesn't really work very well. And other consortia are built around a kernel of intellectual property. For instance, the All-Scene Alliance was founded based on software dump that Qualcomm made. So they had this project, and this generated about 250,000 lines of code, and they didn't quite know what to do with it. So they decided to open source it, but also build a consortium about it. And that's a rather interesting thing. Well, open source is something that first of all, is very good. But on the other hand, they are trying to create a security standard for a certain area of the Internet of Things. And you don't normally create a security standard by dumping 250,000 lines of code at people and not having a specification of what's in there, because security documents need much more analysis even than other documents. So open source alone also isn't quite enough. You actually have to have an open process that allows input from many sides, and there's actually an organization now that has been created to connect those standards bodies who are operating under these open standards principles, and that includes, for instance, the IETF, but also IEEE, which is a little bit further away from these principles, but still has a very open way for people to participate. Sometimes infuriating that you can't get at the documents, but still for a pretty nominal charge, you can actually participate and influence what's going on. And other organizations like the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, also work based on this model of operation. And I think in the Internet of Things, we are going to see much more weight to standards which have been built based on this model of generating quality specifications.
So I think Tim O'Reilly said, he said that create more value than you capture when you're in various ecosystems. And I think the IoT space is a space where you really, this is really very true. As soon as you open your device up to talking to devices that you haven't thought of, you have created two things. You've created first a new company. Someone else has got something that's talking to yours. But of course, they have to have one of yours to talk to. So they're now out doing your work for you. And so that's a case of you've opened up, you've created some value, but you haven't captured it all. You've left it for the other things. Historically, people were marveled, of course, that Microsoft created huge, opportunities. Sometimes they were sad about them because it was in the form of, virus scanners and other things like this. But in general, it was a huge ecosystem that just got created, and we're living in the middle of it, and it's still there. And that's really, really important. Apple figured this out with all the cases for their phones, right? It was a huge ecosystem. They won't let you put stuff in the phones, but you can put stuff around them, and there's a huge ecosystem of that. And so I think this is the case for this. So even if you have an IoT alliance whose only purpose it is to standardize the power connector or the recharge connector, right? Wow. That's still creating a thing. We have it. It's micro USB, so we don't have to do that. But the point is that still it's created a huge ecosystem of useful stuff, and that's why I think you come to something like this is for that.
All right. Well, I think with that we'll leave it. Thank you, panelists. We'll talk about this a little bit more later.
Okay. Well, that was episode number 11. For a summary, for links, and for other valuable resources, go to the show notes. They can be found at iot-inc.com/podcast, along with the show notes for all the other podcasts. We take the notes for you. So if there's anything that you heard in the show that you want to link to, you'll find them there. Well, now I could use your help. We're trying to get this show off the ground, and the best way to get discovered is with iTunes. So if you've enjoyed the episode or found it informative, I'd really appreciate a review. All you have to do is go to iot-inc.com/iTunes, and that'll redirect you to our iTunes page where you can let people know what you think by simply giving this show a star review or leaving a comment. I'd really appreciate that. Now, these are still early days for the show. I'm always looking for feedback, and I've been starting to get a lot of it. I appreciate it. You can send me an email directly at bruce@iot-inc.com. I'd love to hear from you. So, until next time, may your path to IoT business be a symbiotic one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.